What happens when a most powerful warrior queen in the galaxy thinks she's married a simple human farmer, only to discover that Earth's greatest secret isn't hidden in some government facility. It's sleeping next to her every night. Queen Zarathul of the Nexarian Empire commanded fleets that could shatter planets and armies that made entire star systems kneel. She had conquered worlds, bent the strongest alien races to her will, and never met a force she couldn't crush. But when a chance encounter with a quiet human named Marcus during a diplomatic mission led to an unexpected romance, she thought she was finally experiencing something normal, something peaceful. She was wrong, because Marcus wasn't just any human. He was something the galaxy had whispered about in legends, but never seen, a being whose true nature would make gods tremble and whose awakening would change the balance of power across every known star system. The alien queen who thought she had found love was about to discover that sometimes the greatest power in the universe comes in the most unassuming package. And when that power finally awakens, not even she would be prepared for what her ordinary husband could do. This is the story of how the galaxy's most feared queen learned that Earth had been hiding its most dangerous secret in plain sight, and that secret had just become her family. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling gardens of the Nexarian Imperial Palace as Queen Zarathul stood before the massive viewport in her private chambers. Her reflection stared back at her, 7 feet of pale blue skin, intricate silver markings that denoted her royal bloodline, and eyes that glowed with an inner fire that had intimidated countless enemies across the galaxy. Those same eyes now held something she rarely allowed herself to feel: contentment. 3 years had passed since she married Marcus Chun, a human she had met during what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic mission to Earth. The memory still brought a rare smile to her lips. She had expected to find another primitive world filled with the usual collection of warlike species that populated most of the galaxy. Instead, she found something entirely unexpected, a planet of beings who seemed almost deliberately unremarkable. The humans had welcomed her delegation with a mixture of awe and nervous excitement. Their technology was decent, but not exceptional. Their military was organized, but hardly threatening to an empire that spanned 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their leaders were diplomatic, but clearly outmatched by the political complexities of galactic civilization. In every measurable way, Earth was exactly what it appeared to be: a young world just beginning to understand its place among the stars. But then she had met Marcus. It happened during the 3rd day of negotiations when her security detail insisted on inspecting the agricultural facilities that would supply food for her extended stay. The delegation had been touring a farming complex outside what the humans called Portland when she noticed him. While her advisors droned on about crop yields and soil composition, she found herself watching a human male who was working alone in one of the greenhouses. He was unremarkable by most standards: average height for a human, dark hair that needed cutting, wearing simple work clothes that had seen better days. But there was something about the way he moved, the careful precision with which he tended to his plants, that caught her attention. When their eyes met through the glass, he didn't freeze in terror like most beings when confronted with her imposing presence. Instead, he nodded politely and returned to his work. That simple gesture of treating her like a normal person rather than an object of fear or worship had intrigued her more than all the elaborate ceremonies and desperate attempts at appeasement she had endured from other worlds. Later that evening, she had found an excuse to return to the facility alone, much to the horror of her security detail. Marcus had been sitting outside the greenhouse, eating a simple meal and reading from a primitive paper book. When she approached, he looked up and offered her half of his sandwich without ceremony. "You look hungry," he had said simply. "This place doesn't exactly scream fine dining, but it's better than it looks." No one had offered to share food with her in over 2 decades. No one treated her with such casual kindness without expecting something in return. They talked for hours that night about plants, about worlds, about the strange loneliness that came with power and responsibility. He told her about his dream of developing new crop strains that could grow in harsh conditions, potentially helping feed worlds with damaged ecosystems. She found herself sharing thoughts about leadership and the weight of ruling that she had never voiced to anyone. When her delegation prepared to leave Earth 3 weeks later, she made a decision that shocked the entire galaxy. She requested that Marcus be allowed to return with her as a cultural consultant. The human governments practically fell over themselves, agreeing to anything the powerful alien queen wanted. What they didn't know, what no one knew except Marcus himself, was that she had fallen in love with the quiet farmer who treated her like she was just another person worth knowing. The next 2 years had been the happiest of her life. Marcus had adapted to life on her home world with surprising ease, learning their languages and customs while maintaining his gentle, unpretentious nature. He had established a research facility on Nexarian Prime, working to develop crops that could survive in the harsh conditions of many of the Empire's worlds. The work was genuinely valuable, providing real benefits to billions of her subjects. But more than that, he provided something she had never experienced, a relationship built on genuine affection rather than fear, political necessity, or calculated advantage. When Marcus looked at her, he didn't see the conqueror of worlds or the Iron Queen of the Nexarian Empire. He saw Zara, the woman who worried about her people, who enjoyed terrible romantic movies, and who had never learned to cook because she'd had servants her entire life. Their marriage ceremony had been a galactic event, broadcast across dozens of star systems. Representatives from hundreds of worlds attended, partly out of genuine respect, but mostly out of fear of offending her. The spectacle had been magnificent, a celebration worthy of an empress who commanded the loyalty of trillions. But her favorite memory was the private ceremony they had held the night before, just the two of them in her garden, exchanging simple vows under the twin moons of Nexarian Prime. Marcus had worn a human-style suit rather than the elaborate ceremonial robes her culture demanded, and she had chosen a simple white dress instead of her traditional armor. For those few hours, they were just two people in love, not the representatives of worlds and empires. Now, 3 years later, their life had settled into something she would never have believed possible: normalcy. Marcus spent his days in his research facility, developing new agricultural techniques and corresponding with scientists across the Empire. She handled the endless demands of ruling a galactic civilization, managing territorial disputes, overseeing trade negotiations, and maintaining the delicate balance of power that kept hundreds of worlds from tearing each other apart. Their evenings belonged to them. They would share meals, watch entertainment programs from various worlds, and talk about everything and nothing. Marcus would tell her about his latest experiments, and she would vent about particularly frustrating political situations. Sometimes they would simply sit together in comfortable silence, reading their respective materials while enjoying each other's presence. It was domestic in a way that her advisors found incomprehensible. More than once, her military commanders had suggested that such a public display of what they perceived as weakness was dangerous to her reputation. How could the Iron Queen of the Nexarians be seen living like an ordinary married couple? But the truth was simpler than they understood. For the first time in her life, Zara felt truly content. She had power, purpose, and, most importantly, someone who loved her for who she was rather than what she represented. That contentment was about to be shattered. The first sign that something was wrong came during what should have been a routine diplomatic dinner. Ambassador Kethvar of the Thalorian Republic had been pressing for increased mining rights in the Outer Rim territories, a reasonable request that required little more than standard negotiation procedures. But as the evening progressed, his demands became increasingly aggressive and unreasonable. "The Nexarian Empire has grown soft," he declared during the third course, his reptilian features twisted with disdain. Perhaps the Great Queen has been too distracted by her pet human to maintain proper vigilance. The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every other ambassador at the table froze, expecting her immediate and violent response. In the old days, such disrespect would have resulted in Kethvar being dragged from the room in chains, his world facing immediate economic sanctions or worse. Instead, Zara simply set down her eating utensil and fixed him with a stare that could have frozen plasma. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "you seem to have forgotten that my pet human has developed agricultural techniques that now feed 12 of your worlds. Perhaps you should consider whether insulting my husband is worth starving your own people." Kethvar's confidence faltered slightly, but he pressed on. "Techniques developed by human cleverness, perhaps, but protected by Nexarian strength. Yet how strong can the Empire be when its queen chooses to breed with inferior species? This time, several ambassadors actually gasped. Even by the brutal standards of galactic politics, questioning the genetic worthiness of the royal bloodline was essentially a declaration of war. Zara stood slowly, her full height casting a shadow across the table. When she spoke, her voice carried the cold authority that had conquered worlds. You will apologize for that remark, Ambassador, or you will leave this palace and never return. But instead of backing down, Kethvar smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent warning signals through her experienced mind. I think not, Your Majesty. You see, the Thalorian Republic has been conducting its own research into human capabilities. We have discovered some very interesting facts about your husband's species. Facts that suggest the Nexarian Empire may not be as secure as you believe. Before she could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Her personal communicator activated with an emergency signal that made her blood run cold. It was the code for an invasion, something that hadn't been used in over 50 years. Your Majesty, came the voice of her military commander. We're detecting massive energy signatures in the outer system. Unknown vessels are dropping out of hyperspace. More ships than our sensors can accurately count. Through the viewport, she could see the first flashes of weapons fire in the upper atmosphere as her orbital defense platforms engaged whatever force had just arrived. The lights of the capital city below flickered as emergency power protocols activated. It seems, Kethvar said calmly, rising from his seat, that the Thalorian Republic has decided to test just how strong the Nexarian Empire really is. My people have formed an alliance with several other systems who share our concerns about your recent choices in leadership. The other ambassadors were frantically activating their own communicators, some demanding immediate evacuation, while others try to contact their home governments. The carefully orchestrated diplomatic dinner had just become the opening act of a war. But Zara's attention was focused on something else entirely. Where was Marcus? He should have been in his research facility, but that was located in the industrial sector of the capital, one of the areas that would be targeted first in any invasion. Your Majesty, her security chief's voice crackled through the communicator. We're detecting teleportation signatures throughout the palace. They're coming from inside our shields. That was impossible. The palace's defense grid was powered by the planetary core itself, generating barriers that could withstand direct hits from stellar-class weapons. Nothing should have been able to penetrate them, let alone establish teleportation locks inside the perimeter. The answer came in the form of armed figures materializing throughout the dining hall. They wore the distinctive black armor of Thalorian assault troops, but their equipment was unlike anything she had seen before. Energy weapons that hummed with unfamiliar power, armor that seemed to bend light around itself, and, most disturbing of all, faces that showed no fear whatsoever as they found themselves in the same room as the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. Queen Zarathul of the Nexarian Empire. One of them announced formally, by order of the Galactic Liberation Coalition, you are under arrest for crimes against the natural order. You will surrender immediately and submit to judgment. She almost laughed. In her entire life, no one had ever been foolish enough to attempt to arrest her personally. The idea was so absurd that for a moment she wondered if this was some elaborate joke. Then, she noticed that Marcus still wasn't answering his communicator. The laughter died in her throat, replaced by something far more dangerous. These invaders hadn't just attacked her empire. They had threatened her family. The distinction mattered more than they could possibly understand. You have made, she said quietly, her voice dropping to the tone that had preceded the destruction of entire fleets, a very serious mistake. The lead soldier raised his weapon, some kind of energy projector that crackled with barely contained power. Surrender now, or we will use force. Zara smiled, an expression that her enemies had learned to fear more than her anger. Please do. What happened next became the subject of legends throughout the galaxy. The security recordings, when they were finally recovered, showed 17 armed and armored soldiers, representatives of species known for their military prowess, being systematically dismantled by a single Nexarian female wearing a formal dinner dress. She moved like liquid lightning, her enhanced physiology allowing her to cross the room faster than their weapons could track. Her bare hands tore through their advanced armor like paper, and Her strength sent fully grown warriors flying across the hall hard enough to embed them in reinforced walls. Within 30 seconds, 16 of them were unconscious or worse. The 17th was suspended 3 feet off the ground, held by a grip around his throat that could have crushed his windpipe with the slightest pressure. "Where?" she asked conversationally. "Is my husband?" The soldier tried to speak, but managed only strangled gasps. She loosened her grip just enough to allow words. The human has been secured." "By whom? Where?" "Coalition. Forces Special Containment." She dropped him to the floor and turned to address the terrified ambassadors who had witnessed the entire display. "This dinner is concluded," she announced calmly, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened. "I suggest you all return to your ships and inform your governments that the Nexarian Empire is about to remind the galaxy why we rule it." As she strode from the hall, stepping over the unconscious forms of her attackers, her mind was already shifting into the cold, calculating mode that had won 1,000 battles. But beneath that tactical thinking was something her enemies had never seen and wouldn't understand until it was too late. They hadn't just attacked her empire. They hadn't just threatened her people. They had taken her family. That was going to be the last mistake they ever made. But as she reached her command center and began issuing orders for a counterattack, one thought nagged at the back of her mind. The soldiers she had just defeated were equipped with technology that shouldn't have existed. Their weapons were more advanced than anything in her intelligence files, and their armor incorporated materials she didn't recognize. More disturbing was their complete lack of fear when confronting her personally. Every species in the galaxy knew her reputation. Even her own soldiers maintained a healthy respect for what she was capable of. But these warriors had faced her as if they believed they had some advantage she didn't know about. What did they know about humans, about Marcus, that she didn't? The question would haunt her as she prepared to tear the galaxy apart to get her husband back. She just had no idea that the answer would change everything she thought she knew about the quiet farmer she had married. Marcus Chun was about to show the universe that Earth's greatest secret wasn't hidden in some government facility or ancient artifact. It had been sleeping next to her every night for 3 years. And now it was about to wake up. Marcus Chun woke up to the sound of humming machinery and the distinct metallic taste that came with recycled air. For a moment, he lay still with his eyes closed, taking inventory of his situation through senses that most humans didn't know they possessed. The surface beneath him was cold metal, his hands were secure behind his back with some kind of energy restraint, and there were at least 6 different individuals in the room based on their breathing patterns and heartbeats. He had been unconscious for approximately 4 hours, judging by the way his body felt, and the faint chronometer readings his enhanced senses could detect from nearby equipment. Long enough for his captors to move him somewhere significant, but not long enough to reach another star system. Slowly, he opened his eyes and found himself looking at a curved metal ceiling that definitely wasn't part of any Nexarian facility. The architecture was wrong, too angular, too focused on function over the aesthetic beauty that his wife's people preferred. This was a military vessel, and based on the subtle vibrations he could feel through the deck plating, it was currently at full combat readiness. "Ah, the human awakens," came a voice to his right. Marcus turned his head to see a Thalorian officer studying him with unconcealed fascination. The reptilian alien wore the insignia of a scientific division rather than standard military markings, and his eyes held the kind of intense curiosity that Marcus had learned to be wary of during his years in the galactic community. "Dr. Esikatar, I presume," Marcus said calmly, recognizing the name from intelligence briefings he'd read about Thalorian military research programs. "I have to admit, when Zara showed me your file, I never expected we'd meet under these circumstances." The Thalorian's head tilted in surprise. "You know my work? Hard not to, when you're married to someone who keeps track of every significant military researcher in the galaxy," Marcus replied, testing the restraints on his wrists. The energy bonds were sophisticated. They would tighten if he struggled, and were designed to disrupt the nervous system of anyone who tried to break free through brute force. "Though I notice you've been developing some interesting new technologies since your last published papers." Esikatar moved closer, his scanning device humming as it passed over Marcus's body. "Indeed, technologies that were developed specifically for this moment, human. Your wife may be the most powerful individual warrior in the galaxy, but she's not the only one capable of learning from past conflicts. Is that what this is about? You're trying to prove something to Zara by kidnapping her husband. Kidnapping. Essie Katar laughed, a harsh sound that resonated strangely in the metal room. My dear human, you misunderstand the situation entirely. This is not about your wife's reaction to your capture. This is about what you are and what your species has been hiding from the rest of the galaxy. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I'm afraid I don't follow. Of course you don't. The deception has been maintained for so long that even most humans believe it themselves. Essie Katar activated a holographic display that showed star charts of Earth's region of space. Tell me, Marcus Chun, what do you know about your planet's first contact protocols? The question seemed innocuous enough, but something in Essie Katar's tone suggested there was more to it than casual conversation. Earth's governments established contact procedures when galactic civilization first made contact. Standard diplomatic protocols. Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual, Sikatar repeated thoughtfully. And yet in the 3 centuries since first contact, humanity has remained remarkably unremarkable. A single world with decent technology, but no real military power. A species that has contributed useful innovations, but never threatened the established order. One might almost say they've been deliberately maintaining a low profile. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. How much did they actually know? And, more importantly, how they learned it? You're suggesting humans are deliberately underachieving? He asked. That seems like a strange conspiracy theory, even for military intelligence. Oh, but it's not a theory anymore, Skatar said, gesturing to another technician who approached with a different scanning device. You see, we've been monitoring Earth for some time now. Not the official diplomatic channels that your governments control, but the older signals, the background energy patterns that your world has been producing since long before you achieved spaceflight. The new scanner passed over Marcus's body, and he could feel it probing deeper than normal medical equipment should have been able to reach. There was something invasive about it, something that made his instincts scream warnings he hadn't felt since childhood. What we discovered, Sikatar continued, studying the scanner's readings with growing excitement, is that Earth isn't broadcasting the energy signature of a normal inhabited world. The patterns are all wrong for a planet with only 8 billion humans living normal lives. Instead, the data suggests a population of beings whose individual energy output is approximately 50 times higher than what we observe in your public interactions. Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly and immediately focused on controlling it. These weren't the kind of people he could afford to show weakness to, and they certainly weren't the kind he could allow to see fear. Energy signatures can be misleading, he said carefully. Earth has a lot of industrial activity and natural electromagnetic phenomena that could skew readings. But that's where you're wrong. Essie Katar pulled up another display, this one showing comparative data from dozens of worlds. We've accounted for all known industrial and natural sources. The excess energy is definitely biological in origin, and it's distributed across your entire population. The only reasonable conclusion is that humans as a species are far more powerful than you pretend to be. And you think I'm somehow representative of that hidden power? I don't think anything, human. I know. Essie Katar's scanning device began beeping rapidly, and his expression shifted from scientific curiosity to something approaching awe. The readings I'm getting from your body right now are extraordinary. Your cellular energy output, your neural activity patterns, even your basic metabolic functions, they're all operating at levels that should be physically impossible for any known carbon-based life form. Marcus closed his eyes and focused on the meditation techniques he'd learned as a child, the ones his father had taught him, just as his grandfather had taught his father, going back through generations of careful preparation for a day they'd all hoped would never come. But the truly fascinating part, as Katar continued, is that according to our readings, you're actively suppressing most of your natural capabilities. It's as if your entire body is operating under some kind of massive voluntary restraint. That's quite an imagination you have there, Doctor. Is it? Then, perhaps you'd like to explain why our most advanced scanning equipment shows that your muscular system is capable of generating approximately 30 times more force than you actually use, or why your nervous system appears to be processing sensory information at speeds that would allow you to track individual photons, while you behave as if you have ordinary human reflexes. The restraints around Marcus's wrists suddenly felt much less secure than they had a few minutes ago. Not because they had weakened, but because he was becoming increasingly aware of exactly how much force he could generate if he chose to. The knowledge was dangerous, not just to his captors, but to the carefully maintained secret that had protected Earth for centuries. You know, he said conversationally, my wife is probably pretty upset about this whole kidnapping thing. Zara tends to take family matters personally. Your wife's reaction is precisely what we're counting on, came a new voice from the doorway. Marcus looked up to see a figure he recognized from intelligence briefings. Admiral Korith Dan of the Thalorian Republic, a military strategist known for his innovative tactics and complete ruthlessness in pursuing victory. The Admiral moved into the room with the confident stride of someone who believed they held all the advantages. Queen Zarathul is indeed responding exactly as we predicted. She's mobilizing her entire fleet to hunt us down, which means she's pulling her forces away from defending her core territories. A diversionary tactic, Marcus realized. This isn't about me at all. You're using my capture to manipulate Zara's military positioning. Partly correct, but you're underestimating your own importance. Korith Dan activated a communications display that showed the tactical situation throughout the Nexarian Empire. Red indicators marked dozens of simultaneous attacks on Imperial worlds, while blue markers showed the movement of Zara's fleets as they rushed to respond to reports of his location. You see, Marcus Chun, your capture serves multiple purposes. Yes, it forces the Queen to scatter her forces in a desperate search, making our primary objectives easier to achieve. But, more importantly, it allows us to study the first live human specimen we've been able to acquire. Specimen. Marcus felt a cold anger beginning to build in his chest, the kind of emotion he'd spent his adult life learning to control. I'm sorry, did you just refer to me as a laboratory animal? What would you prefer we call you? Korith Dan asked with mock politeness. The term human seems insufficient, given what our research has revealed about your species. Perhaps we should use one of the older names, the ones that appear in ancient galactic records from before humanity supposedly achieved spaceflight. Marcus went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Tell me, what do you know about the Void War? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Void War was ancient history, a conflict that had supposedly taken place thousands of years before humanity achieved faster-than-light travel. According to galactic records, it had been a devastating conflict between the early interstellar civilizations and some kind of extra-dimensional threat that had emerged from the space between universes. Every schoolchild knows about the Void War, he said carefully. Ancient history. A galactic conflict that was won through cooperation between the early spacefaring races. Cooperation, yes, but our records were incomplete regarding exactly who provided the decisive force in that victory. Korith Dan gestured, and the display changed to show ancient star charts overlaid with battle reports. Recent archaeological work has uncovered some very interesting information about the final battles of that war. The display zoomed in on a particular region of space that Marcus recognized with a sick feeling in his stomach. It was Earth's solar system, but the timestamp on the records showed dates from millennia before humanity's official first contact with galactic civilization. It seems, Korith Dan continued, that the beings who finally turned the tide against the void entities were described as warriors of unmatched power, appearing from the void between worlds to drive back the darkness. They were said to possess abilities that defied conventional understanding of physical limitations, strength that could shatter planets, speed that could outrun light itself, and an immunity to the reality-warping effects that made void entities so dangerous to conventional forces. Marcus kept his face carefully neutral, but his mind was racing through calculations. How much did they actually know? How much was speculation? And, most importantly, how long did he have before they decided to test their theories in ways that would make secrecy impossible? Fascinating historical research, he said, but I fail to see what ancient legends have to do with me. Ancient legends that place these mysterious warriors as originating from exactly the same solar system that humanity now calls home. Sitar interjected, his scanning devices still recording every detail of Marcus's biological responses. Legends that describe beings who looked remarkably similar to modern humans, but who possessed abilities that your species has never demonstrated in 3 centuries of galactic contact. You're suggesting that humans fought in the Void War? That we've been hiding our true capabilities for thousands of years? Marcus managed to inject just the right note of skeptical amusement into his voice. That seems like an awfully elaborate conspiracy to maintain. Does it? Consider the alternative explanation. Korath Dan leaned against the wall, studying Marcus with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. A species with the power to defeat void entities would represent a threat to every other civilization in the galaxy. They would be too dangerous to be allowed to exist freely. Unless, of course, they chose to hide their true nature and present themselves as harmless. The perfect camouflage, Esikatar added. Appear weak and unremarkable, contribute just enough to galactic civilization to be useful, but not threatening, and ensure that no one ever suspects what you're really capable of. Marcus felt the restraints around his wrists, designed to contain any known species, and realized that his captors had no idea how inadequate their precautions really were. The energy bonds that held him were sophisticated, but they were designed for beings who operated within normal physical parameters. They wouldn't even register the kind of force he could generate if he stopped holding back. But that was exactly the problem. If he revealed what he was truly capable of, it wouldn't just confirm their suspicions, it would validate every fear that had led to this moment. The secret that Earth had maintained for millennia would be exposed, and the consequences would extend far beyond this single ship or even this single conflict. You know, he said thoughtfully, there's a much simpler explanation for all of this, which is, you've made a mistake. Humans aren't hiding some ancient power. We're just a normal species that happened to develop useful agricultural techniques. Your energy readings are probably picking up interference from the scanning equipment itself. Your historical research is connecting dots that don't actually form a pattern, and you've kidnapped a farmer because you've convinced yourselves that we're more dangerous than we actually are. Korath Dan and Sikatar exchanged glances, and Marcus could see that his explanation wasn't convincing them. If anything, his attempt to downplay their theories seemed to be reinforcing their suspicions. An interesting theory, Korath Dan said finally. Fortunately, we have a way to test it. The Admiral activated another control, and the walls of the chamber began to glow with energy patterns that Marcus recognized with growing alarm. They weren't just scanning equipment. They were restraint fields designed to suppress abilities in captured enemies. You see, Marcus Chun, we've developed these containment systems based on technology recovered from Void War archaeological sites. They're specifically designed to neutralize the kind of enhanced abilities that the ancient records describe. If you're really just an ordinary human, Esikatar added, then these fields should have no effect on you whatsoever. You should feel exactly the same as you did a moment ago. But Marcus could already feel the change. The suppression fields were designed to contain beings like him, and they were working exactly as intended. The careful control he'd maintained his entire adult life was being stripped away layer by layer, like removing weights that had been holding back a dam. His enhanced senses, normally kept at barely above human levels, began sharpening to the point where he could hear individual conversations happening throughout the ship. His physical strength, constantly restrained through conscious effort, started to return to its natural levels. Most dangerously of all, the instinctive combat responses that his people had developed during the Void War began to surface from the deep psychological conditioning that had kept them dormant. Fascinating, Sikatar breathed, watching his scanners as they registered the dramatic changes in Marcus's biological readings. The suppression fields are causing an inverse effect. Instead of restraining him, they're causing some kind of enhanced state. Not enhanced, Korath Dan corrected grimly. Revealed. The field are designed to strip away concealment and suppression effects. If they're causing changes in his capabilities, it means those capabilities were there all along, just hidden. Marcus closed his eyes and fought against the rising tide of power that threatened to overwhelm his careful self-control. This was what his people had feared for centuries. The The moment when their true nature would be exposed to a galaxy that wouldn't understand and certainly wouldn't forgive. But as the suppression fields continued their work, stripping away generations of careful conditioning, Marcus began to remember things he'd spent his adult life trying to forget. The training he'd received as a child. The stories his grandfather had told him about the old days. The warnings about what would happen if the galaxy ever learned the truth about what humans really were. And, most importantly, the protocols that had been drilled into every human child for the past 3,000 years. What to do if the secret was ever discovered. You know, he said quietly, opening his eyes to look directly at Korith Dan, you really shouldn't have done this. And why is that? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since his capture, he allowed his captors to see exactly what they had taken prisoner. Because now I can't protect you from what's coming. The energy restraints around his wrists, designed to contain any known species in the galaxy, snapped like paper as he stood up. Somewhere in the distance, alarms began to sound throughout the ship. But they weren't responding to his escape. They were reacting to the energy signature that was now radiating from his body as the suppression fields completed their work. On screens throughout the bridge, Thalorian technicians watched in growing horror as their sensors detected an energy output that exceeded anything in their databases. The readings were so far beyond known parameters that their equipment couldn't accurately measure what they were seeing. Admiral Korith Dan stared at the displays in disbelief. That's impossible. No biological entity can generate that much energy. Admiral, came the panicked voice of his sensor operator, we're detecting similar energy spikes throughout the galaxy. Hundreds of them. Thousands. It's as if something just activated every member of an entire species. In his private chambers aboard the Nexarian flagship, Marcus felt the change as it rippled through the quantum field that connected every human consciousness across the galaxy. After 3 millennia of silence, the ancient protocols were activating. Earth's greatest secret was about to be revealed, and the galaxy was about to remember why it had once trembled at the mention of the beings who walked between stars. The first thing Marcus noticed as the suppression fields completed their work was the sound. Not the alarms blaring throughout the Thalorian ship, but something far more profound, the harmonic resonance that connected every awakened human consciousness across the galaxy. It was a frequency that existed below normal hearing, felt rather than heard, carrying information at speeds that made faster-than-light communication seem sluggish. Through that connection, he could sense them all. Every human who had felt the activation protocols engage. Every descendant of the Void War veterans who had spent millennia pretending to be ordinary farmers, scientists, traders, and workers throughout galactic civilization. They were waking up, and with them, the memories that had been carefully suppressed for 3,000 years. Dr. S.E.K. Tar was frantically adjusting his scanning equipment, trying to make sense of readings that exceeded every parameter in his database. Admiral, his energy output is still climbing. This is beyond anything we've ever recorded from a biological entity. How much beyond? Admiral Korith Dan demanded, his military mind struggling to process the implications of what they were witnessing. Sir, our equipment stops registering meaningful data at energy levels equivalent to a small star. He passed that threshold 30 seconds ago and shows no signs of stabilizing. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber, no longer bothering to maintain the careful physical restrictions he'd lived with his entire adult life. The restraints that had held him lay in melted fragments on the deck, destroyed not by any deliberate action, but simply by proximity to his body as it returned to its natural state. I tried to warn you, he said quietly, his voice carrying harmonics that made the metal walls of the chamber resonate in response. The suppression protocols weren't designed to protect the galaxy from us. They were designed to protect us from ourselves. Through the quantum link, he could feel his people across hundreds of worlds receiving the same memories he was recovering. The weight of what they truly were, what they had sacrificed to maintain peace, and what they would have to become now that the secret was exposed. On Earth, Maria Santos was working in her research laboratory in Geneva when the activation hit her. One moment, she was analyzing protein structures for her latest medical breakthrough. The next, she was remembering how to manipulate matter at the molecular level without any equipment at all. The lab equipment around her began operating with impossible precision as her unconscious mind reached out to control systems that had never been designed for telepathic interface. In the Andromeda Spiral, Captain James Liu was commanding a freight hauler when 3 millennia of genetic memory suddenly reasserted itself. His ship, which had been struggling with engine problems for weeks, suddenly hummed to perfect efficiency as he unconsciously reached out to repair systems he couldn't normally access. His crew stared in amazement as damaged components throughout the ship began regenerating themselves. On the industrial world of Kepler 442b, Dr. Sarah Kim was teaching xenobiology to a mixed class of species when she suddenly found herself aware of the biological processes of every living being within 50 kilometers. Plants responded to her presence by accelerating their growth, and the small injuries carried by her students began healing at visible rates. But it was on the diplomatic station orbiting Vega Prime that the most significant awakening occurred. Ambassador David Chun, Marcus's cousin, though they hadn't seen each other since childhood, was in the middle of mediating a territorial dispute between 3 aggressive species when the protocols activated. For 30 years, he had been one of the galaxy's most respected diplomats, known for his ability to find peaceful solutions to conflicts that had seemed impossible to resolve. Now he remembered why. The 3 alien representatives who had been screaming at each other moments before suddenly found themselves overcome with an inexplicable sense of calm. Their aggressive impulses didn't disappear, but they found themselves able to think more clearly about the underlying causes of their dispute. Without realizing it, David was projecting a psychic field that enhanced rational thinking while suppressing emotional volatility. Within minutes, species that had been on the verge of war were discussing compromise solutions that addressed everyone's core needs. "How did you do that?" asked the Kalari representative, a being whose species had never been known for their cooperative nature. David looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time in decades. "I'm not sure," he said honestly, "but I think I'm starting to remember." Back on the Thalorian ship, Admiral Korathan was receiving reports that defied all military logic. "What do you mean? The humans are changing?" "Sir," came the voice of his intelligence officer, "we're receiving reports from every sector. Human civilians throughout the galaxy are displaying capabilities that our intelligence files indicate they don't possess. Agricultural workers are somehow increasing crop yields in real time. Medical personnel are achieving healing rates that violate known biological limits. Even human children are showing abilities that exceed adult members of most other species." "How many humans are we talking about?" "All of them, sir. Every human in the galaxy appears to be experiencing some kind of enhancement event simultaneously." Marcus listened to the communications traffic with the part of his mind that could now interface directly with their ship systems. Through electronic signals that carried far more information than their designers had intended, he could monitor everything happening throughout the galaxy. "You wanted to know what humans really are," he said to his captors. "Would you like me to show you?" Without waiting for an answer, he reached out with senses that could perceive reality at levels that most species couldn't imagine. The ship around them wasn't just a collection of metal and electronics. It was a pattern of organized matter and energy that could be understood and, if necessary, modified. The hull of the ship, which had been designed to withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons, began to shift and flow like liquid. Not damaged, but transformed. Where there had been a military vessel designed for war, there was now something that looked more like a work of art, flowing lines and curves that somehow maintained all the original functionality while becoming aesthetically beautiful. "Impulse sector vis spirit." Matter doesn't behave that way. The molecular bonds are suggestions, not laws, Marcus finished. Everything in this universe is just energy expressing itself in temporarily stable patterns. When you understand that, manipulation becomes a matter of polite negotiation with the forces involved. Admiral Korathan was staring at his transformed ship with the expression of someone whose worldview was collapsing in real time. The ancient records were accurate. "You really are the beings who fought the Void War." "We fought in it," Marcus corrected, "but we weren't the only ones. Every species in the galaxy contributed to that victory, each in their own way. We just happened to be particularly good at the kind of warfare that the Void entities required." "What kind of warfare was that?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, accessing memories that had been locked away for most of his life. The Void War hadn't been a conventional conflict fought with ships and weapons. The entities that had emerged from the space between dimensions didn't follow the physical laws that govern normal matter. They were living paradoxes that could make reality contradict itself simply by existing. Reality warfare, he said finally. The void entities could make physics stop working in their vicinity. Energy weapons would fire backwards. Gravity would push instead of pull. Cause and effect would reverse themselves. Conventional military forces couldn't fight something that could make their weapons turn against them. But you could. We evolved in a universe where the laws of physics were more like guidelines than absolute rules. When the void entities tried to impose their reality distortions on us, we could simply choose not to be affected. And when we fought back, Marcus gestured around the transformed ship. Well, you've seen what happens when someone who can manipulate reality decides to apply force. Through the quantum link, Marcus could feel his people throughout the galaxy coming to terms with their revealed nature. For some, like the diplomats and researchers, the transition was relatively smooth. They had always been using subtle aspects of their abilities without realizing it. For others, particularly those who had been living in purely human communities, the sudden awareness of their true capabilities was overwhelming. But all of them were receiving the same deep memory that Marcus was accessing, the reason they had hidden in the first place. The Void War hadn't ended with humanity's victory. It had ended with humanity's choice. When the last of the void entities had been destroyed and the galaxy was safe, the other species had looked at their human allies with a mixture of gratitude and terror. Beings who could reshape reality were not the kind of allies that anyone could feel comfortable living beside, no matter how grateful they might be for the assistance. Humanity had faced a choice: accept the fear and isolation that would come with their revealed power, or find a way to live peacefully among species that would never truly trust them. They had chosen a third option. We voluntarily suppressed ourselves, Marcus explained to his captors. Every human child for the past 3,000 years has been born with genetic and psychological conditioning that locks away most of our natural abilities. We became a species of farmers and scientists and artists because we chose to be. We wanted to live normal lives among normal people. But why? S.E.K. Tar asked, his scientific mind struggling to understand a species that would voluntarily limit its own evolution. Because power without connection is meaningless. What good is the ability to reshape reality if you're too isolated to share it with anyone? We discovered that being feared as gods was far lonelier than being accepted as ordinary beings who happen to be useful neighbors. Admiral Korath Dan was studying the communications displays that showed the ongoing transformation of humans throughout the galaxy. But now that secret is exposed, what happens next? Marcus felt the quantum link carrying a new signal, not from Earth, but from the Nexarian fleet that was racing toward their location. Zara had felt his awakening through their marriage bond, and her response was exactly what he'd expected from the woman he loved. Now, he said, my wife is going to be very upset with you for breaking something that took 3,000 years to build. Through the ship's sensors, he could detect the approaching Nexarian fleet. 12 dreadnoughts, 30 heavy cruisers, and enough support vessels to level a continent. Queen Zarathul wasn't coming to negotiate. She was coming to erase every trace of the people who had threatened her family. Admiral, came the panicked voice of the ship's sensor operator. We're detecting massive energy signatures approaching. It's the entire Nexarian battle fleet, but they're moving faster than our intelligence reports indicate they're capable of. Marcus smiled sadly. She's probably pushing her ships beyond their design limits. Zara doesn't handle threats to her family very well. Can you contact her? Korath Dan asked, suddenly, looking like a military commander who was beginning to understand just how badly he'd miscalculated. Convince her that we're willing to negotiate? I could, Marcus said thoughtfully. But first, you need to understand what you've really done here. You didn't just capture a human and expose our abilities. You've ended 3 millennia of peaceful coexistence between humanity and the rest of galactic civilization. Through the quantum link, Marcus could feel his people throughout the galaxy grappling with the same realization. The careful balance they had maintained, the delicate fiction that had allowed them to live normal lives, was shattered beyond repair. Every government, every military, every species in the galaxy would now know that humans were far more than they appeared. There's no going back, he continued. The suppression protocols can't be reactivated once they've been broken. Every human in the galaxy is now operating at their true capability level, and that's going to change everything. Change it how? Esikatar asked, though his expression suggested he was beginning to understand the implications. Tell me, Doctor, what happens to galactic civilization when one species can manipulate matter and energy at will? When human farmers can feed entire worlds with a thought, when human engineers can repair damaged ships through direct contact, when human doctors can heal injuries that were previously fatal. The Thalorian scientist went pale. Economic disruption, political upheaval, every existing power structure in the galaxy would be threatened. And that's just the beneficial applications, Marcus added. You've also just revealed to the galaxy that there's a species capable of turning entire fleets into abstract art if they feel sufficiently threatened. How do you think that's going to affect interstellar relations? Admiral Korath Dan was staring at his displays with the expression of a military commander who had just realized that his brilliant tactical maneuver had actually triggered a galactic catastrophe. We have to find a way to reverse this, to restore the suppression protocols. Impossible, Marcus said gently. The conditioning that maintained them was psychological as much as genetic. Once a human remembers what they really are, they can't forget again. And now that some of us are awake, the quantum resonance will eventually awaken all of us. Through the ship's communications array, Marcus could detect signals from human communities throughout the galaxy. The awakening was spreading exponentially as each awakened individual's quantum signature triggered the activation of others nearby. Within days, every human in known space would be operating at full capacity. However, he continued, there might be a way to prevent the worst consequences. What kind of way? Korath Dan asked desperately. Marcus felt the Nexarian fleet approaching and made a decision that would echo throughout history. You're about to meet my wife, Admiral. When she arrives, I suggest you listen very carefully to what she has to say. Because Queen Zarathal is about to become the most important person in the galaxy. I don't understand. She's going to have a choice to make, Marcus explained. She can use her fleet to destroy everyone involved in this incident, which would send a clear message about the consequences of threatening her family. Or she can choose to help us find a new way for humans to coexist with the rest of galactic civilization now that our true nature has been revealed. Through their marriage bond, Marcus could feel Zara's emotional state as she approached. Rage at his capture was mixing with fascination at his transformation and growing concern about what this revelation would mean for their future together. The choice she makes in the next few hours, he continued, will determine whether the next chapter of galactic history is written in cooperation or in blood. The Nexarian fleet dropped out of hyperspace with a synchronization that spoke of perfect coordination and overwhelming force. 12 of the most powerful warships ever constructed took up attack positions around the single Thalorian vessel, their weapons powered and targeting systems locked. Through the ship's communication array came a voice that every being in the galaxy had learned to recognize and respect. This is Queen Zarathal of the Nexarian Empire. Zara's voice carried the cold authority that had conquered worlds. You will return my husband immediately, or I will demonstrate why it was a mistake to threaten my family. Marcus smiled and reached out to touch the communication controls, his enhanced abilities allowing him to interface directly with the ship's systems. Hello, Zara. We need to talk. Her voice immediately shifted from imperial command to personal concern. Marcus? Are you hurt? What have they done to you? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. But we have a problem that's bigger than just this ship or this incident. What kind of problem? Marcus looked at his captors, who were listening to every word with growing understanding of just how far beyond their control the situation had moved. The kind that's going to change everything, he said. And we're going to need your help to make sure the galaxy survives what's coming next. Queen Zarathal materialized on the bridge of the Thalorian vessel through a personal teleportation system that her enemies had never suspected she possessed. The technology was a closely guarded secret of the Nexarian royal family, and its sudden use sent shock waves through the ship's crew, who found themselves face to face with the most dangerous individual in known space. She appeared in full battle regalia, 7 feet of controlled fury wrapped in armor that pulsed with energy patterns, her eyes blazing with the cold fire that had made entire fleets surrender rather than face her in combat. But Marcus, watching through his enhanced senses, could detect something else beneath the Imperial presence: confusion, concern, and a deep uncertainty about what she was seeing. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice carrying harmonics that made every Thalorian on the bridge take an involuntary step backward. "Everyone except my husband and the individuals responsible for this incident will leave this room immediately." The bridge crew didn't need to be told twice. They filed out with the rapid efficiency of beings who understood that their continued existence depended on following orders without question. Within moments, only Zara, Marcus, Admiral Korathan, and Dr. Isikitar remained. Marcus stood as his wife approached, and for the first time in 3 years, she saw him without the careful physical restrictions he'd maintained throughout their marriage. The difference was startling. Where she had known a gentle, unassuming man of average height and build, she now faced someone whose presence filled the room with barely contained power. "Marcus," she said softly, her imperial facade dropping for a moment. "What's happened to you?" "I've remembered what I am," he replied, reaching out to take her hand. The moment their skin touched, she gasped as his enhanced abilities allowed her to experience the quantum resonance that connected him to every awakened human across the galaxy. Through that connection, she felt the weight of 3,000 years of hidden history. The truth about the Void War, the voluntary suppression that had followed, and the awakening that was now spreading throughout known space. She saw through his memories how humanity had chosen exile over fear, preferring to be unknown rather than unopposed. "Your species," she whispered. "You're the ancients. The beings from the old legends." "Not ancients," Marcus corrected gently. "Just people who learned to hide very well." Admiral Korathan, watching this exchange with growing alarm, decided that military directness was his only remaining option. "Your Majesty, you need to understand the implications of what we've discovered. This changes everything about the galactic balance of power." Zara turned to face the Admiral with an expression that made him immediately regret speaking. "You mean it changes everything about your plans to overthrow my empire by manipulating what you thought was my weakness?" "That's not. We were trying to protect. You were trying to exploit what you perceived as a vulnerability," she interrupted. "You captured my husband because you thought he was just a human farmer who could be used as leverage against me. Instead, you've awakened something that you don't understand and can't control." Dr. Isikitar, his scientific mind still struggling to process the readings from his equipment, stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Majesty, the energy signatures we're detecting from your husband and from humans throughout the galaxy, they exceed anything in our database. If this represents their true capabilities, then humanity alone could destabilize every existing government in known space." "Could they?" Zara asked, though her question was directed at Marcus rather than the Thalorian scientist. Marcus considered the question seriously. Through the quantum link, he could feel his people throughout the galaxy coming to terms with their revealed nature. Most were confused and frightened by the sudden return of abilities they'd never known they possessed. But some, particularly those who had always felt constrained by their artificial limitations, were beginning to explore what they could really do. "Yes," he said honestly, "if we wanted to. A single human operating at full capacity could take control of most starships through direct interface with their computer systems. A small group could reshape the infrastructure of an entire planet. And all of us together." He paused, accessing calculations that made him uncomfortable. "All of us together could probably recreate the universe according to whatever design we preferred." "But you won't," Zara said. It wasn't a question. "No, we won't. That's why we hid in the first place. Power without responsibility is corruption, and absolute power." Marcus shook his head. "We learned that lesson during the Void War. The entities we fought had unlimited power, and it made them into something monstrous. We chose a different path." Admiral Korathan was studying the displays that showed the ongoing awakening throughout the galaxy. "But that choice is no longer yours to make. The suppression protocols have failed, and your people are manifesting abilities whether they choose to or not. How long before some of them decide that they prefer being gods to being farmers. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus felt it through the quantum link, the growing awareness among his people that they could do almost anything they wanted, and the inevitable temptation that came with such realization. It's already happening, he admitted. There's a group of humans in the Tau Ceti system who are experimenting with matter manipulation on a planetary scale. They're not trying to cause harm, but they're treating an entire world like a laboratory. And there are others who are beginning to wonder why they should accept authority from species who can't match their capabilities. Zara moved to the bridge's main display, where she could see tactical information from across the galaxy. The reports coming in painted a picture of accelerating change as humanity's true nature revealed itself. On the agricultural world of Kepler, for 38b, human farmers were somehow convincing their crops to grow in patterns that spelled out messages visible from orbit. On the mining stations in the Vega system, human engineers were restructuring asteroid facilities in real time, improving efficiency by orders of magnitude. Most disturbing of all, on the diplomatic station at Wolf 359, human negotiators were somehow compelling agreement from species that had been at war for centuries. They're not being malicious, she observed, but they're also not hiding anymore. They can't, Marcus replied. The quantum resonance that connects us means that every human in the galaxy is now aware of what they're really capable of. And once you know you can reshape reality, it becomes very difficult to pretend that you're limited by normal physical laws. Dr. SEK Tar was frantically taking notes on his portable recording device. This represents the most significant xenobiological discovery in galactic history. We need to establish research protocols, study the mechanisms behind these abilities, understand how they interact with normal spacetime. No, Zara said firmly. We need to prevent a war. The Thalorian scientists looked confused. A war? Who would be insane enough to declare war against beings with these capabilities? Everyone, Marcus answered sadly. Every government, every military, every species that realizes they're now sharing the galaxy with beings who could unmake their entire civilization on a whim. It doesn't matter that we don't want to hurt anyone. The capability alone will be seen as an existential threat. Zara nodded grimly. I'm already receiving reports of emergency sessions being called in governments throughout my empire. My own military commanders are requesting authorization for preemptive strikes against human populations before they become a threat. And in the coalition territories, Admiral Korithdan added reluctantly, there are voices calling for immediate mobilization of every available fleet. The fear is that if humanity is allowed to fully awaken to their capabilities, no one else in the galaxy will have any choice but to submit to their authority. Marcus felt the weight of 3,000 years of careful planning collapsing around them. The peaceful coexistence that his people had worked so hard to maintain was dissolving in the face of revealed truth. Fear would drive other species to desperation, and desperation would lead to violence that could destroy everything they had tried to protect. There has to be a solution, he said. Some way to prove that we're not a threat without triggering the exact conflict we're trying to avoid. Is there? Zara asked, because from where I'm standing, it looks like the galaxy is about to divide into two camps. Those who want to destroy humanity before you become too powerful to oppose, and those who want to surrender immediately to avoid being destroyed by you. Through the quantum link, Marcus could feel his people throughout the galaxy grappling with the same realization. The choice was being forced on them whether they wanted it or not. They could either accept the role of galactic overlords that everyone expected them to take, or they could face extinction at the hands of species too terrified to allow them to exist. There is a third option, Zara continued thoughtfully, but it would require something that no empire in galactic history has ever attempted. What kind of option? Integration rather than domination or destruction. She turned to face the Thalorian officers. Admiral Korithdan, your research has revealed humanity's true nature. Dr. SEK Tar, your equipment can detect and monitor their enhanced abilities. What if instead of viewing this as a threat, we treated it as an opportunity? Marcus felt a spark of hope through their marriage bond as he began to understand what she was suggesting. You're talking about bringing humans into the existing power structure rather than having them replace it. Exactly. The Nexarian Empire has always been built on the principle that different species contribute different strengths. We have warriors, scientists, diplomats, engineers, each race providing what they do best. What if humans became the species that provides reality manipulation and advanced problem-solving? Dr. S.E.K. Tarr was studying his readings with new interest. A managed integration rather than an uncontrolled awakening. Humans would work within existing governmental and military structures rather than establishing their own separate power base. But would other species accept that? Admiral Korath Dan asked. The fear level throughout the galaxy is already reaching panic levels. Convincing governments to willingly integrate beings with godlike powers seems impossible. Not if it's presented properly, Zara replied. And not if the humans themselves demonstrate that they're committed to working within existing systems rather than replacing them. Marcus felt the quantum resonance carrying his thoughts to his awakening people throughout the galaxy. The idea of integration rather than separation resonated with many of them. They had never wanted to be rulers, only to live normal lives among friends and neighbors. It could work, he said slowly, but it would require something unprecedented. Humans voluntarily placing themselves under the authority of other species, even though they could easily seize control for themselves. Would your people accept that? Zara asked. Marcus reached out through the quantum link, feeling the collective consciousness of humanity as they considered the proposal. Fear, uncertainty, and a deep desire for peace rather than conflict. They had hidden for 3 millennia to avoid exactly the situation they now found themselves in. If there was a way to resolve it without violence, most of them would accept almost any terms. Yes, he said finally. Most of us would accept integration under external authority if it meant we could continue living normal lives. But there are some who won't be satisfied with that solution. How many? Marcus consulted the quantum resonance, feeling for the minds that carried different intentions than the majority. Maybe 5%. Humans who believe that since we have the power to rule, we should rule. They're not malicious, but they won't accept being subordinate to species they could easily dominate. 5% of 8 billion humans, Dr. Siktar calculated. That's still 400 million individuals with reality-altering capabilities. 400 million potential gods who don't want to accept limits on their power, Admiral Korath Dan added grimly. That's not a manageable problem. That's a civilization-ending catastrophe. Zara studied the tactical displays that showed the continuing awakening throughout the galaxy. Then, we need to make sure those 400 million understand that there are consequences for choosing the path of domination. What kind of consequences? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew what she was thinking. The kind that only the Iron Queen of the Nexarian Empire can provide, she replied. I've spent my entire life proving that power must be balanced with responsibility. If some humans choose to abuse their abilities, they'll learn why the galaxy fears me more than it fears anyone else. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. Zara, these aren't ordinary enemies you can simply defeat in battle. A human operating at full capacity could reshape reality at will, she finished. Yes, I understand that. But they're not the only ones with capabilities that exceed normal parameters. She activated a communication link to her fleet. Admiral Theknor, prepare the Nexarian battle group for Operation Starfall. Authorization level Imperial Omega. Marcus felt his enhanced senses detecting massive energy buildups throughout the Nexarian fleet as weapon systems he'd never known existed came online. Through the ship's sensors, he could see the 12 dreadnoughts beginning to glow with energy patterns that exceeded anything in his knowledge of their technology. What is Operation Starfall? He asked quietly. Something I hope never to use, Zara replied. The Nexarian Empire has spent the past 50 years developing weapons specifically designed to fight enemies who don't follow normal physical laws. We learned from studying ancient Void War artifacts and theoretical models of reality-altering combat. Dr. S.E.K. Tarr was staring at his readings in disbelief. Your ships are generating energy signatures that shouldn't be possible for conventional technology. What are you powering those weapons with? The same thing that makes my husband so dangerous, Zara said simply. Reality manipulation. The Nexarian royal family has been hiding our own secrets, Admiral. We've learned to blend conventional technology with abilities that most of the galaxy believes are purely mythological. Marcus stared at his wife with new understanding. You're not entirely Nexarian, are you? My great-grandmother was human, Zara admitted. A Void War veteran who chose to stay hidden among our people rather than returning to Earth. She taught our family abilities that we've kept secret for 3 millennia, abilities that we've now incorporated into our most advanced military technology. The revelation changed everything. If an Nexarian empire had been secretly developing reality manipulation technology for decades, then they weren't helpless against awakened humans. They were prepared for exactly this scenario. So the choice, Marcus said, is for my people to accept integration under your authority or face a war against an empire that's specifically equipped to fight beings with our capabilities. That's one way to put it, Zara agreed. But I prefer to think of it as offering your people the same choice you made 3,000 years ago. Live peacefully among their neighbors, or face the consequences of choosing conflict. Through the quantum link, Marcus felt his people throughout the galaxy considering the implications of this new information. The awakening was continuing, but now it was tempered by the understanding that they weren't the only ones with hidden capabilities. I think, he said slowly, we need to have a conversation with the rest of the galaxy. All of us. Together. A galactic summit? Admiral Korathan asked. Something like that. But not just governments and military leaders. Everyone. Every species, every world, every individual who's going to be affected by what happens next. Zara smiled, an expression that combined her imperial authority with genuine affection for the man she'd married. My dear husband, she said, I think you just described the most complicated diplomatic mission in galactic history. Probably, but it's the only way to prevent the most destructive war in galactic history. Through the quantum link, Marcus felt his people's agreement resonating across the stars. The age of hiding was over, but perhaps the age of cooperation was just beginning. If they could survive what came next. 6 months after what historians would later call the Great Awakening, the Nexarian Imperial Palace had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic civilization. A permanent diplomatic complex where every species in known space maintained active representation. The elegant gardens that had once been Zara's private retreat now hosted delegates from over 300 different worlds, all working together on the most ambitious project ever attempted. Marcus stood in what had once been the formal throne room, watching as human engineers worked alongside Thalorian scientists and Nexarian military strategists to design the framework for a new form of galactic government. The irony wasn't lost on him that the room where Zara had once held court as an absolute monarch was now the birthplace of the most democratic institution the galaxy had ever seen. The integration protocols are working better than anyone expected, reported Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had become the unofficial coordinator for human participation in the new system. Like every human in the galaxy, she was now operating at her full potential. But, unlike the early days of the awakening, she had learned to modulate her abilities to work effectively with non-enhanced beings. How are the resistance movements adapting? Marcus asked. The 5% of humans who had initially rejected integration had caused significant problems in the first months after the awakening. Several star systems had experienced what amounted to benevolent, but unwelcome takeovers as reality-manipulating humans decided they could govern better than existing authorities. Most of them are coming around, Elena replied. Once they realized that Queen Zara wasn't bluffing about the consequences of choosing domination over cooperation, the appeal of being galactic overlords lost most of its attraction. The demonstration had been necessary, but Marcus still regretted its violence. When a group of awakened humans had seized control of the Rigel system and declared themselves its new rulers, Zara had responded with surgical precision. Her reality-capable weapons had stripped away their enhanced abilities without permanent harm, but the message had been unmistakable. Power without responsibility would not be tolerated. There are still holdouts, Elena continued, but they're mostly isolated individuals rather than organized movements. The quantum resonance network has been helpful in identifying potential problems before they escalate. Marcus nodded, feeling the constant background presence of the network that connected every awakened human consciousness. It had become something more than just a communication system. It was a collective awareness that helped them maintain the balance between individual capability and group responsibility. "Your Majesty," came a voice from the doorway. Marcus turned to see Ambassador Kethvar approaching with the deferential manner he'd adopted since the revelation of human abilities. The Thalorian diplomat who had once insulted humanity as inferior was now one of the strongest advocates for the integration protocols. "Ambassador," Marcus replied formally. He had never been entirely comfortable with the title that the new Galactic Cooperative Council had insisted on giving him. As the husband of the Nexarian Empress and the de facto representative of awakened humanity, he held a unique position in the emerging governmental structure. "The Council is ready to vote on the final version of the Capability Accords," Kethvar reported. "All species representatives have indicated their support for the framework, though several are requesting additional safeguards for the reality manipulation provisions." Marcus felt a familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The Capability Accords represented 3 months of intense negotiation to establish formal protocols for how enhanced beings would interact with the rest of galactic civilization. The document covered everything from technological development guidelines to emergency response procedures, but at its heart was a simple principle. Extraordinary power required extraordinary accountability. "What kind of safeguards?" he asked. "Monitoring systems for large-scale reality alterations, mandatory integration for any human developing beyond baseline enhancement levels, and emergency suspension protocols if any enhanced individual begins exhibiting signs of dissociation from normal social structures." The requirements were